They called it the Galactic Assembly, a grand collection of intellects, empires, and entities spanning a third of the known universe. For millennia, it stood as the crowning achievement of reason, a forum where war had been replaced with diplomacy, and survival was ensured not by conquest but by cooperation. Within its halls, conflict was an artifact of lesser species. At least, that's what they believed. Until they discovered Earth. Humanity was not the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel, nor the most advanced in weaponry or longevity. But when the observers brought their findings to the assembly, what they reported disturbed even the oldest minds present. For humans had not evolved alongside galactic peace, but had clawed their way through their own self-made hell. War was not ancient history for them, it was tradition. Genocide, civil strife, ideological purges, cataclysmic weapons that could level continents, these were not relics, but recent memories. The assembly reacted with cautious interest. Many spoke of the need to extend guidance to such a primitive species. A few, mostly from the elder races, argued for quarantine. But they were overruled. Curiosity prevailed, as it often did among the powerful. Earth would be contacted. Observers would be embedded. Protocols would be followed. Among those voices was mine. My species, telepathic, pacifistic, revered for our neutrality, was tasked with emotional and cognitive assessments. I volunteered. I do not know why. Perhaps because I had read the transcripts. I had seen the faces of their revolutionaries, watched the footage of soldiers carrying wounded civilians through burning cities. I had felt the heat of their rage in second-hand memory, and the unbearable pull of their grief in interviews conducted by drones. I should have turned away. Instead, I said, "Let me speak on their potential." I told the assembly the truth as I saw it. Humans are not inherently evil, but uniquely volatile. Their minds burn hotter. Their passions run deeper. Their decisions are not always calculated, but they are always committed. They do not believe in failure the way other species do. Where others retreat, they adapt. Where others surrender, they evolve. This makes them dangerous. The hall grew quiet as I spoke. I explained their contradiction. Compassion lives side by side with cruelty. They mourn their enemies. They honor fallen foes. They write songs about battles they regret starting. They have faith, not just in gods, but in each other. That faith, I warned, can be beautiful. But when broken, when their hope curdles into fury, there is no creature more terrifying. I was asked, "Are they a threat?" I answered, "Only if you break them." There were objections. Some delegates laughed. One mocked humanity's primitive biology. What can flesh and bone do against plasma and phase shields? I didn't respond with theory. I shared records. Video footage, audio, recovered logs from Earth's conflicts, a downed pilot fighting off an armored unit with nothing but a flare and a shattered jaw, a medic shielding enemy wounded with her own body, a child hacking a satellite uplink to call in reinforcements when her parents fell. I let the assembly see what I saw, feel what I felt. The chamber dimmed in silence when I finished. Still, the vote passed. Humanity would be invited, monitored, evaluated. And yet, as the delegates dispersed, I remained in my seat, eyes locked on the hollow map of Earth. So small. So loud. So human. I remembered an old human phrase I had once come across, buried in a pre-contact archive. A curse and a prayer, all at once. It echoed in my mind like prophecy. "May the gods help you when humans go mad." I whispered it once more, to no one in particular. Because I knew they would. They did not arrive with fanfare, but they arrived with purpose. 3 ships, scarred by re-entry and time, entered orbit above the Assembly's prime station. Humanity had accepted the invitation, not out of deference, but with the quiet certainty of a species that had already survived its own extinction more than once. They came not seeking approval. They came to understand what they were now a part of, and whether it was worthy of them. The assembly gathered to watch. The human delegation emerged, unarmored, unescorted. No genetic enhancements. No ceremonial codes. Just a handful of individuals, walking into a chamber where species 10,000 years their senior waited to evaluate them like insects on glass. They didn't bow. They shook hands. They smiled. Their lead speaker was a woman in her 5th decade, her eyes tired but unyielding. She wore no translation implants. She had learned the common tongue herself. She began not with data or projections, but with a story, of oceans crossed, of plagues endured, of machines built from ruins, of a species that refused extinction at every turn. She spoke not to impress, but to explain. She didn't ask for inclusion. She asked what the assembly planned to do next, now that they had seen a civilization that would not wait for permission. The reaction was mixed. Some delegates were amused. Others offended. One High Chancellor from the CRYLTH Dominion remarked privately that humans had no sense of decorum. He was corrected. Humans simply didn't see fear as a sign of respect. Over the following days, evaluations began. Psychological profiling returned inconclusive. The analysts couldn't find a baseline. Human emotion was too broad, too layered. Their responses to stimulus shifted with context, memory, sometimes even time of day. One telepath described them as walking paradoxes held together by sheer conviction. Their soldiers scored equally on empathy and aggression. Their scientists conducted research as if solving equations was a moral imperative. When asked to demonstrate technology, they presented a fusion reactor built from obsolete alien components salvaged during transit. It wasn't elegant. But it worked. When pressed on protocol breaches, their envoy shrugged. We do what makes sense. Then we figure out how to explain it. During a cultural exchange, a musician from Earth played a song written during one of humanity's bloodiest wars. It moved several delegates to silence. Not because it glorified victory, but because it grieved the necessity of it. A warrior from the Madtari collective reportedly left the chamber mid-performance and requested time to meditate. A minor diplomatic incident occurred when a Clishan envoy issued a thinly veiled insult regarding Earth's history of internal conflict. The human response was immediate and unnerving. Not anger. Not outrage. A calm, calculated smile, followed by, "We know what we've been. And we know what we'll become. Can you say the same?" In private chambers, strategies were rewritten. Intelligence agencies reclassified humanity as high variance. The term was new, but the meaning was clear, unpredictable, capable of rapid behavioral shifts, emotionally driven but not irrational. More than once, the phrase, containment scenario, was uttered. Each time, it was quickly followed by, resource potential, and diplomatic opportunity. The assembly was beginning to understand. Not fully, not yet, but enough to grow uneasy. They had expected either savagery or supplication. They found neither. Humanity wasn't trying to impress. They weren't asking to belong. They were measuring the galaxy the same way it measured them. I spoke again briefly. I confirmed that what I had warned was accurate, but not complete. I told them humans see order as a suggestion, not a rule. They follow rules until those rules fail to protect what they love. Then they rewrite the rules. Or they burn the system that wrote them. Some doubted. Most listened. Before they departed for Earth, the human envoy left a single message with the assembly records. Not encrypted. Not classified. Just a note, addressed to no one and everyone. We are capable of peace. We prefer it. But do not mistake our desire to coexist for an inability to fight. We hope this alliance thrives. But if it does not, remember that we do not fear endings. We've survived too many to be afraid of one more. And just like that they left. The room was silent for long after. No vote was called. No debate was sparked. The assembly, for once, had nothing to add. Because every delegate understood what had just walked into their universe. Something old, something young, something that could be either salvation or storm. And it would not ask for permission. It began without warning. The Scar, a species long thought extinct or isolated, emerged at the edge of the Sagittarius arm and cut through 3 systems in a single cycle. Known not for conquest but annihilation, They didn't broadcast demands or declarations. They simply advanced, leaving behind scorched planets and neural voids, populations erased, not killed, their minds shattered before their bodies fell. Their weapon wasn't just physical. It was psychological. They didn't fight wars. They ended civilizations. The assembly convened an emergency session. Protocol dictated evacuation, defense coordination, the usual steps. But most member species had no framework for facing a threat like this. The Scar were immune to negotiation. Their psychic strikes bypassed shields, turning veteran warriors into catatonic husks. Fleets withdrew. Borders were redrawn. Worlds were abandoned without resistance. It wasn't cowardice. It was rational survival. Humanity didn't withdraw. They didn't consult the assembly, didn't wait for consensus. They mobilized. Units deployed to the front before official authorization was processed. A dozen ships retrofitted for psychic shielding were launched using human-designed algorithms written in Kaith's code, illogical patterns, intentionally disordered, incomprehensible to predictive AI. It didn't block the Scar's mental attacks. It confused them. Disrupted them. Then humans adapted again. They didn't just resist the psychic influence, they leaned into it. The Scar sought to overwhelm minds with despair, fear, madness. But humans had never needed help going mad. They had built entire philosophies on suffering. They endured not by suppressing pain, but by wielding it. One commander allowed his mind to be touched intentionally. The Scar tried to fracture him. Instead, they found memories of trench warfare, of plague wards, of firebombed cities rebuilt by hand. They recoiled. The first major ground engagement lasted 21 hours. No reinforcements. No orbital support. Just infantry, outnumbered 6-1. When the smoke cleared, the Scar had retreated. Not because they were losing, but because they didn't understand why their enemy kept advancing through wounds that should have been fatal, smiling with teeth broken from laughter. Reports followed of humans fighting in vacuum suits duct taped together. Of forward operators weaponizing enemy biotech using nothing but surgical tubing and distilled alcohol. Of units refusing extraction until civilian clusters, alien civilians, were evacuated. In one case, a human demolitions team turned themselves into a kinetic weapon, launching a hijacked Scar drop pod into a command hive. There was no recorded final transmission, only a brief laugh followed by silence. The assembly, now watching in grim fascination, struggled to categorize the behavior. Tactical analysis failed to explain the efficiency. Battle sims run with human logic always broke parameters. Strategic models flagged human response patterns as erratic, non-viable, until they worked. Again. And again. Telepathic races attempted to map the emotional state of human forces. Results were contradictory. Battle rage coexisted with profound empathy. Fear didn't suppress their will, it fueled it. One analyst from the Zelver Enclave described it as emotional alchemy. Pain transmuted into focus. Loss into motivation. Death into legacy. On a captured Scar frequency, a single human broadcast went viral among the fleets. A voice, calm, direct. "We are not your enemy by choice. But we are your end by necessity." The Scar began to change tactics. They avoided direct confrontations with human units. Targeted supply lines, fringe colonies. But it was too late. Humanity wasn't just fighting. They were inspiring. Other species, once resigned to retreat, began to follow their lead. Coalitions formed around human battle groups. Volunteers flooded in, alien, hybrid, augmented. They didn't fight like humans. But they fought because humans reminded them how. In less than 5 cycles, the Scar advance was not only halted, it was reversed. Their strategy unraveled under the weight of an opponent that refused to fear extinction. Humanity didn't just survive the war. They dragged the galaxy back from the brink with them. The assembly finally issued formal commendation. Medals were minted. Statues commissioned. But the humans didn't care for monuments. They returned home with fewer numbers, darker eyes, and no speeches. When asked what drove them to fight, one soldier answered plainly. They came to break us. We showed them we were already broken, and still standing. That was not heroism. That was a warning. Peace returned, but it did not bring comfort. The Scar were gone, scattered remnants drifting in defeat, their network silent. Yet the galaxy no longer looked at humans with curiosity or confusion. They looked with calculation. The same races that once dismissed Earth now measured their own fleets against Terran standards. Defense budgets shifted. Training doctrines adapted. Alliances restructured around human compatibility. Not by demand, by necessity. Because the Assembly now understood what humanity represented. Not a threat. A precedent. For the first time in recorded galactic history, war had not only been survived but won through unorthodox willpower. Protocol had failed. Tradition had failed. Only humans had endured, not through superior firepower but through a refusal to break. The Assembly needed that resilience. And they feared it. Not because humans had shown cruelty, but because they had shown restraint. Records showed dozens of opportunities where complete annihilation of Scar infrastructure was possible. Earth's generals declined. Where others would have erased the enemy to prevent resurgence, humanity left them scattered, hobbled, not extinct. When pressed on this, their representatives gave no technical justification. Only a single phrase repeated across diplomatic channels. We don't become them. This terrified the Assembly more than brutality ever could. Because it meant that when humanity chose violence, it was not instinct. It was deliberate. Controlled. Morally weighed. And that made it unstoppable. Soft power began to follow. Human media, once relegated to cultural exhibits, flooded black markets across hundreds of systems. Not propaganda, fiction. War novels, survival epics, psychological thrillers. Other species consumed these not as entertainment, but as case studies in human psychology. Schools taught Terran history not as admiration but as insurance. They needed to understand the mind that could hold empathy and vengeance in the same breath. New species approached Earth directly. Bypassing the Assembly, they sought alliances, trade, protection. Not out of desperation, but respect. Because they had seen a force that would bleed beside them instead of abandon them. Earth didn't offer dominance. It offered loyalty, earned in fire. That currency now held more value than ancient treaties. Meanwhile, the Assembly fractured beneath the surface. Some members resented humanity's rise. Quiet coalitions whispered about containment. Not war, not yet, but limitations. Restrictions on Terran fleet expansion, oversight on research initiatives, veto power on planetary influence zones. But the humans weren't interested in empire. They didn't push outward. They didn't install governments or claim protectorates. They built hospitals in war-torn sectors. Sent engineers to repair orbital habitats still damaged from the Scar conflict. They exported seeds, water purifiers, field medics. Not to gain leverage, but because they couldn't not. And that unsettled the old powers more than any show of force. Because it revealed a truth none of them wanted to admit. Humans were not trying to take control. They simply acted like they already belong. And they did it with a casual, unshakable certainty that made even their silence feel loud. One assembly meeting, a motion was raised to formally cap human military development. It failed, narrowly. Afterward, a senior strategist from the Velen Ascendancy remarked, "They saved us all, and we still tried to bind them. What happens when they tire of our fear?" No answer came. Because none were confident they'd survive that shift. In the aftermath, rumors spread of a new doctrine emerging on Earth. Not conquest. Contingency. A quietly circulated idea that if the galaxy ever turned against them, humanity would not fight for dominance. They'd vanish. Withdraw into the void. Leave the assembly to crumble under its own stagnation. And if provoked, they would not strike to win. They would strike to end. Not out of hatred. Out of obligation. To ensure no war like the last one could ever happen again. One phrase appeared on encrypted channels, untraceable in origin but clearly human in tone. Coexistence is our offer. Finality is our fallback. The Assembly stopped debating after that. Every vote involving humanity passed with minimal dissent. Not out of submission. Out of understanding. Because the galaxy had finally learned the cost of waking a species that had already fought itself to the brink, and survived. Time passed. The wounds of war faded from stars and stations, but not from memory. The Assembly rebuilt, now tempered by an awareness that no protocol could erase. They had learned to speak of peace with caution, not certainty. At the center of this fragile calm stood Earth, not dominant, not isolated, but ever watched. Not because it sought control, but because it no longer needed to. Humanity remained as it always had, chaotic, brilliant, contradictory. They continued exporting culture and science, sending artists and architects to worlds still regaining stability. They trained peacekeepers, not as conquerors but as guardians who understood what the cost of war truly meant. Their technology advanced quietly, never flashy, always functional. Not once did they demand gratitude. They didn't ask to lead. But when things broke, others instinctively turned to them first. Not because humans were infallible. Because they were familiar with failure, and kept moving anyway. Children across the galaxy now learned Earth history in schools. Not for glorification, but preparation. The lesson was never about heroism. It was about consequence. Every system that had once dismissed humanity now understood their depth not in strength, but in survival. The fact that they were still standing, still choosing peace, was not a sign of weakness. It was restraint, sharpened by memory. Then came the whispers. Not of war, but of fracture. Internal dissent within the Assembly grew. Long-seated rivalries reignited under the surface. Trade disputes turned into territory claims. Smaller species, emboldened by human support during the Scar conflict, began to demand real representation. The older powers resisted. Their traditions, once unchallenged, now cracked under scrutiny. The humans said little. They watched. And that silence spoke louder than any threat. Because everyone remembered what happened when humanity chose to speak. Not with volume, but with resolve. A proposal emerged: dissolve the Assembly in its current form. Rebuild it, decentralized, equalized. Every member species to hold identical vote weight, regardless of age, size, or influence. A radical idea. Unprecedented. And the only ones who publicly backed it from the start were humans. Not because they wanted power, but because they had seen what came from systems built on hierarchy and fear. Earth's own history was littered with empires that rotted from within. They knew the signs. And more importantly, they knew when not to repeat them. Opposition was immediate. Threats of withdrawal, economic sabotage, military standoffs. Yet none escalated. Because in every backroom negotiation, every closed-door session, the same unspoken question lingered. If the Assembly resists change, and fails, what will the humans do? No one knew. That was the problem. Earth's delegates offered no ultimatums. Just a simple statement, submitted without fanfare. We have fought for peace, and we will again if necessary. But if this galaxy insists on repeating the errors that almost destroyed it, we will not follow. We will not prop it up. We will not bleed to preserve it. We will walk away. And if we do understand this, we will not be back. That document was signed by every major human faction, from Earth's governments to their off-world colonies. The message was unified. Final. The Assembly voted. By the narrowest margin, reform passed. And with that, the galaxy changed, not by fire, but by the shadow of it. The humans didn't take over. They didn't celebrate. They continued forward as if nothing had shifted. But everyone else moved differently around them now. With a reverence that came not from fear, but from a shared knowledge of what they had seen. What they had survived. What they could become again, if provoked. An old ambassador, long retired, once summarized it simply in his memoirs. They never asked for power. But we gave it to them the moment we learned what they could do without it. That was the legacy humanity left, not of dominance, but of example. A reminder etched into the fabric of every alliance, every treaty, every cautious step forward. Not of what humans had done, but of what they had chosen not to do,